or collectively, the ways in which we read these stories changes. So I remember last year, actually, I think when I was going to my folder where I keep all of my source sheets for a weekly Torah study, I did Noach last year. And last year I focused, and we spent time really focusing on the idea of Noah's righteousness and what he righteous in his time. And we went more in depth in that. And this year, that's not as interesting to me. So, we all have our priorities shift. So let's begin. And I do want to end. We are going to end today with offering a prayer for the state of Israel, prayer for those who are in captivity, and then the mourner's Kaddish. So we will be offering those things at the end, as opposed to the beginning. But let's begin just with the prayer for engaging the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher nitanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, God, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. I am going to just put my source sheets in the chat for you. If I can figure out how to do this, which I usually a little out of it today. So give me 1 second here. We'll be getting it in a minute. There. Okay. Coming to you as a PDF. But I will, of course, share my screen as well. There are also some really great resources that are out there. And also this Sunday, there's a program. We're not putting it on. I forget the organization. Yossi Klein Halevi, who's a phenomenal teacher and thought partner. He's two things. One, he wrote a really great op-ed that I'm also going to put in the chat called "What This War Is About." Came out a couple days ago in the Times of Israel. I recommend you read it over Shabbat if you haven't already. We have our own resource page that we're going to keep updating as well, but I don't know if it's updated yet, so I'm not going to give that to you at this time. But you will be seeing more and more of that. I think we were supposed to update our website to have a link directly from our homepage to that. I don't know if it's updated yet, but it will be soon, if not already, so that you can get more resources, more learning, more articles, etc. Okay, but let's get into this week's Torah portion. Okay, make this a little bit. The first part is this is something that I know is going around on social media as well. This idea that what we find in the very, very beginning of this Torah portion is a word very much reference to our current day evil terrorist, Hamas. The word Hamas is Hebrew. The word Hamas that is used by the terror organization is an acronym. So it's not the same word, but they're very much aligned. First, I'll read it in English. The earth became corrupt before God. The earth was filled with lawlessness. That word lawlessness or violence is Hamas. That is the word in Hebrew. That's why I kept the Hebrew here. So right here, Hamas. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth, God said to Noah, I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness, again, the word Hamas. Because of them, I am about to destroy them with the earth. So just an interesting connection this week, this idea that the word Hamas, used as I put here, as a noun and a verb, appears 67 times in the Torah, and it's almost always connected with sinful violence. So not necessarily the violence of natural consequences, but extreme wickedness. And we have that right here. And this is already, from my perspective, one of the links between what we find in the Torah portion and what we're seeing in the world and what's happened in Israel. This idea that lawlessness, that this violence of such a horrific magnitude is what led God in the beginning, after God had only 10 generations before actually created the world and put humans on earth, then decides, you know what, the way people are acting, it's not worth it anymore. I'm going to start all over. And I think it's a sentiment that maybe we can connect to, is this idea of, my God, if this is what happens in the world. Like, how are we supposed to understand this? And it's as if God was also similarly befuddled and confused and overwhelmed by the idea that God's creation was capable of such violence, to the point where God felt like it was time to destroy the entire earth. Now, any thoughts on that? Any connections people are making? Any reflections on this idea?
It's sort of,
Yeah, go ahead, Eric.
it's a little bit, I don't know. I'm sorry if this seems, but when God was creating it, it says that he was following the directions. I mean, he was following directions in the Torah to create the world somehow, and that it pre-existed. I was just reading it over before, and it just seems like maybe he, it's like something that he orders from somewhere, and he doesn't put it together quite right, so he wants to fix it or send it back. It's just a fun. I know it's a ridiculous sentiment, but it occurred to me.
That's not ridiculous. I mean, that's the rabbis come up with all kinds of what could seem as ridiculous interpretations, but at the same time give us some insights, or try to teach us a lesson of some kind, right? That God maybe looking back, because some interpretations are that the Torah existed even before the world was created. So
Yeah.
did God look at God's Torah and actually just misread what God created in the first place, and then decide to go back and start over again.
Fixed it, yes.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Alex.
I think this could be used as an example of how God is all-powerful in terms of creation. God created the universe and the world, but perhaps God is not all-powerful when it comes to guiding God's creation. So we often wonder, why do such terrible things happen in the world? Isn't God moving everything around all the time? Isn't God guiding everything? Well, maybe, but maybe not. And I think this is an excellent example. God created the world, but then the world and humanity did what they were going to do, and what they did was, as we've just seen, became very violent and corrupt with each other. Yeah,
and it goes back, actually, Alex, it's a really important point. It goes back even to last week with the first humans that God creates, Adam and Eve. God, what we learned from last week and what we are learning again in this week's Torah portion is that God is not a puppet master. The idea of God as the puppet master is not the Jewish understanding of God's role or how God exerts God's power in the world. That in fact, free will has been given to us, and was probably one of the first gifts that we were given as humans, according to our tradition. And when you have free will, you can either make very good choices or you can make destructive choices. And almost built into the story of this week's Torah portion, when God destroys the world, it's as if God actually learns the lesson that, you know what, God could destroy the world over and over again as much as God wants, but free will still exists. And God still has not destroyed the world even up till today, but look at what humans are capable of. Now, both on the negative side, and I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, I'm still optimistic at heart. I believe there is an inclination within humanity to actually bring more good than evil, but misguided people have really led us down some terrible paths. But this idea of you can't actually destroy human nature, or even more importantly, free will. We have free will, and therefore God here, this idea of even destroying the earth because it was too lawless. Nope. God learned God's lesson after this story. Claudia.
There's a sense of disappointment in this passage. God is disappointed, and he's like, going back to maybe what Alex said, let me start over. Like an inability to deal what he's looking at.
And what, Claudia, this idea of God's disappointment, how does that impact or your understanding of God in any way? Does that change it? Is that something that
It doesn't change me. It doesn't change it because, as you just said, I don't believe in a God as a puppet master. So we are the masters of our destiny. But there's like a sadness, a disappointment, and also a little bit of like throwing his hands up. I really don't know what to do about this, or he's not willing to do anything about it. But maybe let's start over and see if it goes any better, which we know it doesn't. But yeah, it's like God is stepping back.
Yeah, right. God's disappointment in some ways is disappointing to us.
Right.
God is potentially giving up. How disappointing for God to step back, right? That's not necessarily the view of God that we would want, especially so soon in the beginning of the Torah, after God does this miraculous thing of creating the world and bringing about a garden and guiding humanity into the world. But even last week, we had the first murder when one brother kills the other. So, the Torah doesn't waste a lot of time bringing in the reality of the world very quickly to us, that we are not supposed to sit in that Garden of Eden mentality for very long. And maybe that's something that has been an inspiration and a guiding strength to us as a Jewish people for thousands of years, that we don't just sit back and assume the Pollyanna approach to the world. We recognize the challenges that exist. And unlike God, we can't just sit back and say, you know what, we're out. Eric.
Well, I just want to bring up one of my favorite quotes from the great Claude Shannon, who is one of the architects of information science. And the computers all come up. Anyway, what he said was, "We know the past, but cannot control it. We control the future, but cannot know it," which brings it all together.
Thank you. I would love for you to put that in the chat if you get the chance.
Sure.
Before the end, just so we can see that. Hold on to that. Okay. Any other thoughts at this point? Okay. Let's get back to the story then. So we already read this part, make yourself, okay. I have decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I am about to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood, make it an ark with compartments, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, etc., etc. For my part, I am about to bring the flood, waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh under the sky in which there is breath of life. Everything on earth shall perish. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall enter the ark with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. And of all that lives, of all flesh, you shall take 2 of each into the ark to keep alive with you. They shall be male and female. From birds of every kind, cattle of every kind of creeping thing on earth, 2 of each shall come to you to stay alive. For your part, take of everything that is eaten and store it away to serve as food for you and for them. Noah did so, just as God commanded him, so he did. Then God said to Noah, "Go into the ark with all your household, for you alone have I found righteous before me in this generation." Okay, so this is both the part where we hear about the idea that Noah is righteous, and we hear the details that Noah is supposed to build this ark. This was actually the part of the Torah when I took an Intro to Judaism class in college that disturbed me so much that I then went to office hours with the professor. Her name was Deborah Lipstadt, and was just so confounded by this idea of Noah's reaction here. So how do people feel about Noah's response? Before I give my feelings and my impression, God comes to him and says, "I'm going to destroy the world. I need you to build an ark. I want you and your family to be protected. And I'm going to destroy everyone else. You are righteous in a generation of people who are not righteous. You are righteous. So I will protect you." Rebecca.
Is there any connection in the Hebrew between Noah's Ark in the ark that we keep our Torahs in? Because if there is a connection, then the ark is built for protection.
Yes, there is a link. Yes, but what do you mean? Tell me more about what you mean by the protection and what that does for you. This idea of the ark as a protector.
Well, I think just the trial and the non-questioning of that Noah had to go through, he must have had some kind of sense that this was going to be a protection for him and his family in the future.
Yes, definitely, for sure. I think Noah could at least know that he and his family were going to be protected, right? That this ark was a way in which humanity was being protected. That God decided, I'm not going to literally start over. I will start at least with your family and the animals, because you're the best I've got so far. You can either read it as he was very righteous across generations, or he was as good as it gets in a generation where everyone else was even more corrupt. Susan.
I just read a passage last night that Jonathan Sachs wrote, Lord Rabbi, and I was so taken by it. I was able to sleep at night, which I haven't been able to for these last 2 weeks, because it was so beautiful. And what he essentially said, that Noah receives these accolades in the beginning. He was more righteous than anyone in his generation. And Sachs says, God didn't say that about Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. He gets all these accolades. So what was his downfall? He didn't question God. He didn't do anything to help other people. And that's what, I know I've heard before, but Sachs put it so wonderfully, because he compares the beginning with the ending of Noah. He's drunk and he's disheveled and he's lying naked and he's humiliated. His sons discover him. And he said that Noah didn't help recover a shattered world. Some of it could have been his guilt, but some that he did not take steps to repair the world that was shattered. And then Sachs compares it to Holocaust victims and scholars in Israel trying to repair the shattered world, their Jewish world, after the Holocaust. And that's a heroicism that Noah lacked. And what happened then, because he didn't take steps to repair things, he ended up as this drunkard.
Thank you. You got to the end before we did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
Just really, his writings really touch me.
He's amazing. Yeah. May his memory be a blessing. And he died a couple of years ago, but he's a phenomenal scholar. Yeah. What bothered me about the story of Noah is that here God says, I'm going to destroy everything. And Noah just goes along with it, doesn't ask one question, doesn't try and reach out to try and help other people, takes care of himself and protects his family, does exactly what God says, but doesn't question God at all, which is in contrast to what we're going to read very soon with Abraham, and Abraham questioning God with Sodom and Gomorrah. But here, when the entire world is going to be destroyed, when the entire world is falling apart, as I think some of us sometimes can feel, especially what's happening in Israel has really jarred the Jewish people. Like, how can you not say something? How can you not try and help? And how Noah doesn't do that. And it's so upsetting to me. And his ending is telling as well, which we will look at in more detail. Susan alluded to it. But I've always been really frustrated. I feel like Noah has always been cast as a hero. And yes, in some ways he is, but actually he's a flawed hero at best, in my opinion. I've always had trouble with Noah. And maybe someone can convince me otherwise, but to me, he doesn't look at the big picture. and the result is, because of his narrow focus, he then destroys himself and his family at the end, because he is unwilling to look beyond his own responsibilities to his own family or to follow orders. And as a result of that, the world is destroyed, no one else is saved, and then he falls apart at the end. Benjamin, then Claudia.
Brian, thank you for studying with us today. It's so important to look at this. There's things going on, but I'm not trying to convince you otherwise. But if you think of a person assuming that God is, this great power and knows all and controls all and has designed all with good intentions and such, and then you get an order, as you said, an order to do something, well, is a good soldier bound to follow that order? And we've had soldiers who have dropped atomic bombs and killed millions, or not millions, hundreds of thousands maybe. Were they doing the right thing? Should have they protested? So again, I'm not trying to convince you otherwise, but to be a good soldier, there's a role for that as well.
Yep, that's a valid point for sure. I'll just point out that, and I don't know the details of this, but there is some system, at least in the Israeli military, that when they're trying to plan an attack or some kind of campaign, that there's always has to be someone on that team who plays devil's advocate and has to present the other side. That's built into the structure of how the team makes decisions, that you have to have that outside perspective at all times. But yes, okay. So yes, the argument can be, look, he's a good soldier. He's doing exactly, if God were to speak to one of us, would we have the strength or the courage to talk back? And if you are surrounded by a world where you see this lawlessness, we could imagine Noah being like, yeah, there's nothing good here anyway. We should get rid of this. How easy it is. And again, I think about what's going on right now, how easy it is to look at that evil and then make broader generalizations and ideas about all groups of people and say, carpet bomb everything, make it a parking lot, right? There are ways in which we can see all kinds of hate and violence and just decide, you know what, whatever someone wants to do to get rid of all of that, just do it. And maybe Noah is being a good soldier for sure. Claudia, and then Rebecca.
It just made me think also, I know that the consequences of Noah's not pushing back are not personal. His family is saved, while Abraham and Isaac, is a much more personal story. But you could compare the two. Abraham didn't push back either when he was asked to sacrifice his son. Okay, he fought for Sodom and Gomorrah, but how do you compare the two? We always criticize Abraham, but we criticize Noah a little bit less. We just go along with that story a little bit more easily.
Well, what the difference I see is that Abraham, before there's the Akedah and the binding of Isaac, before he's told to sacrifice his son, the earlier narrative is that he actually, tries to convince God not to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and those were with strangers. So the earlier we know Abraham's capability when by the time we get to the Akedah and the binding of Isaac, we know his capacity to be brave, to have a conscience, and to say this is not right. And he chooses not to, and that's why it can be up to interpretation. Does he pass the test by God or not? And why it's such a rich story that we read at the high holidays. Whereas Noah, the only thing we get is really just his agreement with God's command, and nothing else about who he is. And maybe that's potentially the flaw of the writing of this is a piece of literature. We don't have kind of a more expansive understanding of Noah's worldview or his relationships. And so, yes, that can be an argument, but I think we maybe are more sympathetic to Noah because we know less about him, and also we imagine if the world is full of hate and God's going to do something so dramatic, like What else can you do? What is there to do? And kind of a defeatist. Noah must have been, look, he was chosen. There was something special about him. He was righteous in his time. He's a good guy. Like, so he's doing the right thing by following God's commands and building that ark, and he's saving those animals, right? We focus very much on what happens on that ark. We very easily forget everything else beyond that ark. And as I told the religious school on Sunday, which I like to tell starting in 4th grade, at least, I always tell the kids, those images of the ark that we have in those picture books from preschool with the giraffe's head above the ark and the elephant and the nice clear blue sky and the blue waters like it's in the Mediterranean. No, it'd be disgusting. It would be full of bloated bodies. It would be a disgusting, mess. It would smell. It would not be something so picturesque. And yet we've painted that picture, and I think we usually try to maintain that picture, and we forget outside the ark. And the ark becomes kind of this symbol of complete protection, and how easy it is for us to imagine being locked up in the ark. And sometimes it would be so much easier to just be Noah and his family in that ark and deal with whatever drama comes in the ark, and you just forget about the rest of the world. And this is a lesson that what happens when you forget the rest of the world. That it's a cautionary tale in my opinion. All right, thank you, Claudia. Rebecca.
I'm going to defend Noah because I think it's a question of what's ethical and what's unethical. And how many times in our own personal life do we have to try to make those choices? And for me, it was a choice of compromising my ethics in order to keep a job. And I went home and I had whiskey. Does that make me an immoral person, not paying attention to the rest of the world?
Well, look, I know you mean it more rhetorical than literal. So yes, of course, there are going to be times where we are going to ignore the world, and sometimes we have to for our own personal sanity. But there's also degrees to which we are ignoring the world. So yes, he and you're kind of also referring to what happens at the end of the story, which we will get to, and I want to talk about that. But there are some short-term benefits that I think this story is trying to teach us about ignoring the rest of the world, and that you can't be inundated by the violence and evil that you see all around you, because then what you do want to do is just destroy it all. And at the same time, if you become so insular and we become so much protected in our echo chamber of arcs, then what happens also is that you forget the larger world, and you start to see how you start to feel as though the world is really just you and those who are really just connected to you, and the impact of that is also detrimental. And so we have to find something in between, is what I think. What I take, at least this is what I'm taking this year at this moment. Okay, any other thoughts about this part, or about Noah, righteous or not? Yes, Karen. I think that's Karen. Well, we can't hear you. You have to unmute.
Sorry. Okay, I am standing waiting for outside the doctor's office. I didn't want the whole place to listen to the Torah portion. I'm going to take a different tact a little bit and within, but something to do how we have to move with the times. If you notice, when I came in, I was listening to you say about what God had told Noah, what he had to collect for the journey, and in pairs. And he said about a man and a woman. And it shows you, because of recognition of homosexuality or bi or whatever sexuality, we no longer speak in terms of pairs, because there are all kinds of pairs in the world. And I think we have to be cognizant today in listening to what is being said and how we have evolved for understanding and tolerance and things like that. That's my only add there.
Okay, great. So not specifically about Noah and his role, but just about kind of the shifting nature of times and how the Torah has a very clearly defined understanding of sexuality and gender, and that that's not necessarily where we are today, right?
Yes,
And
so we'll say that.
we have to be aware of the cultural and historical context with which the Torah is written, and how we have to navigate what still aligns in today's world and the pieces of our tradition that don't align anymore.
Well
Okay.
done.
Great. Thank you very much. Cindy and then Susan.
Okay, trying to think what the purpose is of having this story, because obviously he couldn't collect 2 lions and 2 fleas. And if someone says, oh, God told me to do this now, they'd be in a mental hospital. But I think the purpose of having this story is to show that we are responsible for animals. We are the caretakers of the animals, and that there is reward for being righteous. Although I've never quite understood what he did that made him defined as righteous.
Okay, so Cindy's focusing more on the idea of caring for the animals, that this is really a really important story to remind us of that, right? Okay,
Yes.
Good. Okay, Susan, and then I want to address a question in the chat that I got as well.
Cindy, that came also, I got an email from Academy of Jewish Religion, the Academy. And the rabbi there talked about the environment, but he also has seeds and plantings. And I should say, despite our current mindset, the reason for pairs, male and female, was what? To propagate, to create new life. And 2 females can't do that, and 2 males can't do that. So there was a reason for that. I mean, when you think about it, be fertile and increase. So I think there is a need for that specificity, even though we enlarge our view today. I'm going to bring up something you have brought, and it always the difference between Abraham and Noah with questioning God. What is your, and you brought this up, and this has always troubled me with Abraham. We're off this story though, that his questioning Sodom and Gomorrah, but not his killing of his son. And that to me was a blind obedience, which also Rabbi Sachs criticizes Noah for blind obedience, but Abraham had blind obedience too in this latter instance. So how can that be? How could you erase that, or find some answer to that?
I mean, my answer is the same for Noah. I think it's just a reminder later on in our history that he failed. In my opinion, Abraham failed the test because he did not question God for something that was his most precious gift that he had received in the world, and he didn't question. So to me, and the reason then why we read it at the high holidays is that, similar to what we read on Yom Kippur in the Haftorah from Isaiah, don't think that you're just a belief in God or you showing up is going to save you and is somehow going to solve all of your problems. In fact, it's going to cause more, because again, just as with Noah, with the blind obedience and his family is destroyed afterwards, the same goes for Abraham. He never talks to his son again, and his wife dies right after that. So the outcomes are not great in both cases. So yes, some would say that obedience in God and a fear of God and an awe of God is really essential. And we read it on the high holidays to remind ourselves that despite the challenges you face, as long as you have faith in God, hopefully, something good will come at the end, right? You will be saved almost, right? Just as his son was saved by the angel interfering. I have trouble with that, because I think that doesn't give enough power to the individual to decide on his or her own fate. Now, I think there's plenty of things that are out of our control. and I believe we should have faith. So, but at the same time, we have significant responsibilities to one another and to ourselves that that require us to ask a lot of questions and to struggle with situations. And both Abraham in that situation with his son, and here with Noah, we have potentially an internal struggle because we don't know what they were doing inside, which we could imagine there was internal struggle. Great, we all have internal struggles. It's if you only keep your struggles to yourself and inside, it destroys you inside. And it has, I think, what the story, at least this one, can teach us is it also leads to the destruction of the rest of the world. That the internal struggles we face have to be addressed, and we have to figure out how we want to take actions to either alleviate that pain, to try and right the wrongs. That requires action. We are such an action-oriented tradition that you can think all kinds of things. It's how you act in the world. And again, yeah, Noah's action here is to build the boat and to create the sheltering presence for himself and his family and the animals. Good, but at the expense of other things. And at the end of the day, at the expense of his own righteousness and his own credibility, because of what happens at the end of the story once they get back onto dry land. Merle.
I guess my big question with all of this is that all those years ago, when these stories were all written, between Abraham and Noah and whoever else, where did they learn the courage to speak out or speak up? I mean, was God teaching them the courage while God was knocking things down because people weren't behaving properly?
I would see it, my own personal take, and I'm curious to hear other people's, is that that's part of the free will, the gift that's been given to us by God, not something that God teaches us. It's something that is built into who we are as humans. We have the capability to be courageous. We have the capability to think in a way that no other animal on earth can think, to build relationships and connections that no other animal can on earth, to be able to build and destroy in a way that no other animal can on earth. So we've been given specific skills and characteristics that make us unique, and therefore our responsibility is to tap into those unique characteristics and skills from our tradition's perspective to try and mend that brokenness, and to try and use a sense of morality and justice to fight against the flood of violence, the fight against the Hamas, the violence that continues to corrupt our world and will continue to do it forever. Just like Amalek is the force that exists in the Torah, that is the ever-present enemy of the Jewish people that we are reminded of with the story of Haman and the story of Purim. That is the force that comes up behind the Israelites as they're wandering in the desert and picks off the weak and the young and the old and the infirmed, right? So there's always a force, and we're supposed to always remember that Amalek will always exist. So we know that there's always forces out there that are going to either be out to attack us specifically as Jews or out to destroy the world. But how can we use our special skills that we've been given as humans to fight against that? Okay, other thoughts at this point? Okay. Let's keep going. John asked, why did God pick Noah? John, I don't know if you're able to, or if you want to, why do you think God picked Noah? You're muted. Hold on. David, you have to unmute. Hold on. There.
I don't know, because I can't think back to the portion before this. It sounds, in one respect, he made a terrible choice, but I don't know. I can't decide. Maybe on purpose. I mean, our God is pretty vengeful. Even after God said He's not going to destroy everything, He goes on to talk about us destroying things. And, get down to Moses, and we're killing firstborn. types of things. So our God is a pretty demanding and vengeful God. So the answer is I don't know where Noah came from. Is this the first mention of Noah in the 3rd chapter of the Torah?
This is what comes right before Noach. This is the Torah portion. This is where it begins. There's a little bit of a preamble before. We don't have much about. So we have up here. We have kind of the history. We have a kind of a history from Adam and Eve and their descendants, kind of walking through the generations and generations. This is not on your handout, but I have it on the screen here. And then we get to Noah and saying this one will provide us relief from our work and from the toil of our hands out of the very soil which God placed under a curse. So we have a little bit of foreshadowing that we have here in chapter 5 to give us a sense of Noah. Then we go and we hear Noah lived 500 years. Noah begot Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Then we have a break where it goes into this very weird thing, which is worth discussing at another time, where these divine beings somehow come down and start to become intimate with humans. And this kind of blending of the divine world and the human world, which then in this Nephilim, which cohabited with the human women who bore them offspring. Such were the heroes of old, the men of renown. So kind of this very sci-fi idea of aliens and humans coming together and having children. And then God saw how great human wickedness was, and the plan devised by the human mind was nothing but evil all the time. And God regretted having made humankind on earth. And with a sorrowful heart, God said, I will blot out from the earth humankind whom I created, humans together with beasts, creeping things, and birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor in God. That's the end of Bereshit, the very first Torah portion. And then we go into the Torah portion about Noah. And then we hear again that he was righteous and he had 3 sons and that the world was corrupt. That's all we get about him. So we have a little bit of foreshadowing that there's something about him that will bring relief, because then, of course, we know he's the one chosen. We don't really get much about his family or anything else other than he was righteous in the time and God found favor in him, with him, and therefore we then go right into the story. So the traditional answer is Noah is chosen because there was something about him that God favored above everyone else. He was righteous. He was different from everyone else who seemed to exist at the time. We don't know any details about what made him that way, other than God chose him. The most we get about Noah's personality is actually at the very end of the story, and it's not a positive view. So we almost can imagine that there's a compare and contrast. We're supposed to imagine that Noah is a certain way because God wouldn't have chosen him if he wasn't capable of doing something like this, because it was an incredible task to literally have the weight of the world on his shoulders and in this boat that he made. But then when we really get insights to his character and his conversations, the real first dialogue is not one that is positive. Okay, Rebecca.
Is it possible that Noah is righteous because he's righteous compared to everyone else at the time who was evil?
Yes, that is the interpretation. That is the traditional idea. And the rabbis actually more just debate whether or not he was righteous across generations, meaning was there something about Noah that was righteous, just like Abraham or some of our other characters, and where their righteousness extended beyond their own lifetime and extended beyond their own life circumstances? Or was Noah really just righteous at the time, and that he was the best option? He was the only option out of a whole bunch of people who were terrible. So, picking a team for your sports team, he's really the only one with any skills whatsoever, and therefore you choose him. Or you choose him because no matter what time in whatever century he would be playing that sport, he would be a great athlete, right? Those are the two ways we can imagine, and how the two ways the rabbis imagine how we could interpret Noah's righteousness. Okay, let's look some further down. I will just say, okay, well, we'll go. I do want to point out that we have 9, 3, and 4. This is an aside, but this is where we learn, according to some, we were supposed to be vegetarians as humans, but because of what happens in this week's Torah portion, we are allowed to eat meat. And that the proof text for that given by some comes right here, where it says, every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses, I give you all these. You must not, however, eat flesh with its lifeblood in it. Okay, so that's usually used as the frame to suggest for those who believe in kind of a vegetarian lifestyle and want to see it from a Jewish values perspective, they would say, well, Adam and Eve, there's no reference to eating animals in the Garden of Eden. That they are supposed to care for everything, but there's nothing specific about what they are allowed to eat. And so therefore, the assumption is that they were probably vegetarians. And it's here after the flood that we finally get that actually every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. Now you can eat meat. That something transitions. And maybe you can interpret this in a whole bunch of ways. This could also be, well, if we can't stifle the human need to destroy animals or to kill, at least maybe this is an attempt to try and mute the intensity of our desire for violence or for killing, right? Throw us a bone, literally, and let us eat meat. I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so let's go. We'll skip that because we're almost out of time. This is about the idea that they're coming out of the ark, and that the first thing that Noah does is actually to offer animals up as sacrifices, and God then says, "I will never destroy the world again in this way." So God makes a covenant. I will maintain my covenant. Never again shall all flesh be cut off from the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. From a lawyer perspective, you could read this and say, okay, well, God actually is not declaring that God will never destroy the world again. God's just saying, I'm never going to destroy the world with a flood. It's a more specific thing, but we usually take it to be a generalization that God is not going to destroy the entire world, and that this is the first of 3 significant covenants, or as we say in Hebrew, a brit. The second one is the one that is specifically between God and the Jewish people. That is the Brit Milah, the covenant that God makes with Abraham to say, you shall circumcise the skin, the foreskin. But this is a covenant that God makes with all of humanity. So what happens is that the covenants that God makes get more and more specific over time. And so the third and final major covenant is the covenant that God makes with the Jewish people at Mount Sinai when God gives the Torah to the Jewish people. But this is a covenant, this is a relationship and a shared commitment that God is making with humanity never to destroy the world again, and that the rainbow is a sign of that covenant. So that every time we see a rainbow, we're supposed to be reminded that our relationship with God is one that at least could supposedly be more peaceful. But I do want to get to the end where what we have, where we see a sense of Noah's personality come out. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham being the father of Canaan. These 3 were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole world branched out. Noah, the tiller of the soil, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and he uncovered himself within his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his 2 brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a cloth, placed it against both their backs, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned the other way so that they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke up from his wine and learned what his youngest son had done to him, curse, he said, and his youngest son, by the way, is the one who first saw his father naked and then went and told his brothers. Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves, shall he be to his brothers. And he said, blessed be Adonai, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be a slave to them. May God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them. Noah lived after the flood 350 years, and all the days of Noah came to 950 years. Then he died. And that's the end of Noah. It's a really anticlimactic way to end the story of the savior of humanity. I mean, it's talk about a fall from grace. And we have this man who saved everyone. And how does he end? He ends by cursing his son, by dividing his family, and by being a drunkard, by losing himself. And we could imagine from a psychological perspective what it must have been like, as I referenced earlier, to be surrounded by such death and destruction. And when you don't deal with that, and when you feel isolated in that, and feel helpless, what that leads to is bad behaviors, or potentially just an unhealthy lifestyle. And what happens here is that Noah tries to lose himself in drink in order to deal with the psychological impact of what he's gone through. And as a result of that, he falls apart, and that's the end of his time in the Torah. So it's a depressing end to the story, and at the same time, again, a very relevant and important lesson for us to be keeping in mind. So before I conclude, Brad, I see you.
Rabbi, flood stories were pretty common, were they not, in the ancient world?
Yes.
And I'm wondering if the others are as developed as ours, as filled with ethical and moral issues, or I'm trying to understand what differentiates us from the other ancient cultures in the recounting of these flood stories.
I mean, let's be honest, Brad, we do everything better. So yes. So yes, no, we have, like many things, creation stories, the flood stories, we bring a value system into it. I'm not an expert on all the other flood stories, but there is a hopefulness that, even if I'm reading it kind of in a more pessimistic way, there's a hopefulness in terms of how the story is developed and created, and the outcome. And the ways in which the story kind of guides us to a rebuilding and a rebirth of humanity that isn't as pessimistic and destructive as some of the other ancient narratives. So there is a unique element to the way in which we've done this, as we have with many other stories in the Torah that could be potentially linked to other ancient cultures and traditions. Thank you, Brad. Okay, Susan.
So, hearing this again, I'm really brought to the realization. Well, first of all, where are you? There are other stories. I don't see Brad.
Oh, Brad, he went off screen, but he's like
that they're gods and heroes that are in those stories. This guy Noah is a man, and hearing it again, I was just struck that he's not really totally bad as Rabbi Sachs, bless his heart, have said. He's human, and he has some good qualities as well as bad. And these are stories in our Bible of these human beings. So maybe it's what I guess Rabbi Leader said, cognitive dissonance. Can you hold two opposing concepts in your mind at the same time? I mean, he did plant, well, there were grapes that led to drunkenness, but you can also eat grapes. So it is a horticulture that he did, and he lived for 950 years. So, I mean, there's something there, and he did save his family. And there are Noahide laws after that are named for him that are supposed to apply to Gentile communities, of which he was. And to be honest, to be good in a bad society is probably harder than to be good in a good society. So
absolutely,
and he has good qualities as well. So.
You're very kind to him, Susan, and he does deserve it, right? He's not a terrible character. There are a lot of, as you stated, a lot of really good things, and I think my approach is, as we do as Jews, is to find all the nitty-gritty ways in which we can continue to improve, right? So yes, Noah was great in many ways. There were also flaws, like all of us. And we learn from his strengths and his positive characteristics, and we take from those. And we also, I think, learn from his flaws. We're supposed to learn from both. Okay, I do want to, we've come to the end. I do want to take the time just to offer a few prayers. I'm going to put them on the screen, and then for us to offer also Mourner's Kaddish, and the hope that we can rebuild, that we will rebuild with a sense of compassion and love, but at the same time, a real need to really protect our people, and to take the concept of Hamas that we have in this week's Torah portion and the same concept that exists in the world today, and eradicate those, because we do not need those at all in the world. So I want us to just offer these prayers. I will offer them, but you can read along silently. First, the prayer for the state of Israel. O Heavenly One, protector and redeemer of Israel, bless the state of Israel, which marks the dawning of hope for all who seek peace. Shield it beneath the wings of your love. Spread over it the canopy of your peace. Send your light and truth to all who lead and advise, guiding them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Grant them deliverance and adorn them in a mantle of victory. Establish peace in the land and fullness of joy for all who dwell there. Amen. For the Israel Defense Forces, may the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless the soldiers of Israel's defense forces and all who stand guard in order to protect our people. May the Holy One, blessed be God, protect them and save them from all troubles and afflictions, from all sickness and injury, and send blessing to all their endeavors. May the words of the prophet come to fruition through them, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And each one shall sit under the vine and under the fig tree, and none shall be afraid. And let us say amen.
Amen.
And those who are being held captive, our God, the one who raised Joseph up from the pit, be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. Send complete rescue and full redemption to those held captive by the enemy. There are too many for us to name. Strengthen their spirit and bring them our prayers that they be protected from all harm. And plant understanding in the heart of the enemy that they may return the captives in wholeness of body and spirit. Grant wisdom to the Israel Defense Forces that they may secure freedom for the captives without loss of life. Grant strength of spirit and courage of heart to all the sons and daughters of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar to release bonds of captivity and allow us all to live in freedom. They shall call upon me and I will answer them. I will be with them in distress. I will rescue them and honor them. And finally, for those who have died as a result of these horrific attacks, feel free to offer this again silently, or if you're muted, out loud along with me. We offer this Mourner's Kaddish for all of them. Yitkadal v'kadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divrach chirutei ve'amlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chay d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'gala v'zman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei rabbah mevarach le'olam olmei olmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei d'kudisha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru imru. Ya'aseh shalom Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Yaakov Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Yaakov. Shabbat Shalom,
Shabbat
everyone.
shalom. Thank you.
Shabbat shalom, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Joel, when was it written, that part that you read before about, keep the people, the soldiers and everybody safe? That is fairly new. That is not old.
I think with the establishment of the state, I don't know the exact.
Right, but in that era,
As far as I know, but that's a good question. I don't know when it was exactly written.
I was just curious.
But
It's
been
so
around
well
for a
written.
while.
It's so
Yeah.
well written.
Yeah.
But thank you for doing this.
Yes.
Beautiful.
All right. Shabbat
Be
Shalom.
well.
Thank you.
See you.